Giant monsters have dominated our collective minds since pre-recorded history. From cave paintings dating back more than 44,000 years depicting them, to our myths and legends being dominated by them, they are a manifestation of our sense of wonder and fear of the unknown. Many ancient maps would be drawn with giant creatures on its edges and unexplored regions, the implication being, here, there be monsters. Hello, my name is Nick, and in this series I will uncover the history of these massive creatures through the lens of cinema. This is the history of giant monsters in movies. If you were to type what is the first giant monster in movies into Google, you'd get the answer of King Kong. Kong is hugely influential to the giant monster genre, and while his first film in 1933 is the big bang of sorts of the giant monster genre and certainly the first to feature a giant monster proper, he is not the first seen on the silver screen. Now, we will be speaking of a time in cinema history that is difficult to research. 80 to 90% of all silent era films are lost to us. We are using assumptions and conjectures based on the films that are left to us and what film historians have uncovered through movie reviews, posters, marquees, or other documents of the times. Because of this, I will hesitate to say with absolute certainty that anything here is a truth. Having said that, the earliest film depiction of a giant monster in cinema that we know about today goes to Georges Méliès's 1912 film, The Conquest of the Pole, starring Méliès himself and Fernanda Albany. The film was loosely inspired by Jules Verne's Voyage Extraordinaires. The film follows a group of explorers on an expedition to the North Pole, where they encounter many dangers, one of which is a giant pipe-smoking frost giant named the Giant of the Snows. The creature itself is quite comical looking, like a Santa Claus that had one too many eggnogs and went on a bender. They manage to destroy it with cannon fire after it devours several of their crew. This film, one of Méliès's last cinematic works, received critical acclaim in France and the UK, but was a box office failure. Despite this, it is considered a masterpiece and maybe his greatest work. The Giant of the Snows was a gigantic marionette which required 12 men to operate. Its head alone was 2 meters high. 2 of the puppeteers hid inside the head to control that giant's ears, eyes, mouth, and pipe. The method is certainly a crude display of the puppetry we would come to expect from the genre, but we can consider this the humble beginning of giant monsters in cinema. This film is readily available, at least in partial form, on YouTube. I'll leave a link for you below to check it out. Méliès was a great innovator in the film industry. He claimed to have invented the stop trick, the process of stopping the recording of a scene and changing the set before starting again, causing the change to be instantaneous. This is a precursor of sorts to stop-motion animation. The process of stop-motion can be seen as repeatedly applying the stop trick effect to make stationary objects appear to move. Let's put a pin in that for now. The next 2 decades of film special effects innovations would be entirely from dinosaur films. While an argument can be made for these creatures being giant monsters themselves, especially at this time where the depictions were highly inaccurate and bearing little resemblance to the living, breathing animals that once walked the earth, I personally feel that they have their own legacy in film that is entirely separate and worthy of a history series all its own, so I won't be covering them extensively in this series. Nevertheless, I'll need to touch upon a few of them as they contain important innovations that are crucial to the giant monster genre going forward. I'm going to briefly discuss 3 such dinosaur films. The first film predates even The Conquest of the Pole, the short film Prehistoric Peeps from 1905, directed by Llewellyn Fitzhammond, and starring Sebastian Smith, Hetty Potter, no, not Harry Potter, and Lottie Martin. It may in fact be the first film to depict a dinosaur, though I haven't done the research to verify that. The film is about a scientist that dreams of a dinosaur that he awakens in a cavern. The dino chases him while he tries to shoot it with his revolver. The professor then meets a group of prehistoric women who flee when other monsters appear. The professor's wife wakes him in his lab, surrounded by fossils, and the short ends. The dinosaur in question is brought to life by 2 men in a suit linked together, like a horse costume you could get at your local Party City. I only mention this because it may in fact be the first time a man-in-suit method could have been used to portray a large creature, a technique that would become very important to giant monster movies in the coming decades. I have not seen this movie personally. The only way to view it is to go to the BFI in London and view the last remaining copy in person, so I can't speak to how well the effect is pulled off. The second film is Brute Force from 1914. Directed by the controversial, even for his time, D.W. Griffith. Though highly influential in the film industry for developing a lot of the film grammar we still use to this day, things such as cutting to close-ups and inserting shots so that the audience's attention could be brought to certain objects in the scene. Unfortunately, he was responsible for The Birth of a Nation, a racist film that was controversial even in its time. No way to sugarcoat it, the man was a racist. This is all the attention I really want to bring to him, so I'm just going to talk about the film. It opens with a man reading a book about primitive man after being ignored by a beautiful woman at a party. We then see the book enacted. A tale of a man, weak hands, losing his girlfriend to another man named Brute Force. Weekhands discovers the design for a new weapon, a club, that defeats his rival and wins back his girl. He then becomes the tribe's leader and defeats various creatures, including a dinosaur and a rival tribe. The rival tribe discover the design for the weapon and use it to capture the women of the tribe. Weekhands sits in despair until he discovers a new weapon, the bow and arrow. The film features a full-size puppet of a ceratosaurus. Though it could only lean forward, move its mouth, and move its tail side to side, it was an impressive effect for the time and a practice that would be used in giant monster cinema to come. Now the third film was Gertie the Dinosaur, also from 1914, by Winsor McCay. While not the first animated film, its influence on giant monsters cannot be overstated. The plot is a simple one. Gertie is asked to do some tricks by her master, who is either on stage during a live performance or a person sitting at a table trying to win a bet with some friends. The animation is incredible for its time and even predates cell animation, so the background had to be chased over for every frame. The result is a very adorable story that is still fun to watch today. Any creature brought to life through stop-motion animation or CG owe their existence to Gertie. If you want to know more about these dinosaur films, there's a fantastic YouTube channel I came across while researching this information. The name is Past Uncut. Go over and watch his videos. They're criminally underviewed for how entertaining and informative they are. I'll leave a link below. With the animation of Gertie the Dinosaur, we've now been introduced to the technique that would be the primary way to bring giant monsters to life in American cinema for the next 75 years. If we take the same principle of animation and apply it to models instead of drawings, we get the technique called stop-motion animation. The idea being you take a picture of a model, move it ever so slightly, and take another picture. When these pictures are played back in a camera, and it's done correctly, the model would look as if it was moving on its own. The amount of focus and patience this takes is tremendous. Think about it. Most films today are filmed at 24 frames per second. That means to animate something moving for 1 second, you need to take 24 still images. For a minute of footage, you would need to take 1,440 still images. Now, most silent films were filmed at about 16 to 18 frames per second, but you get the idea. The amount of work that went into this process is insane. Until you played back the footage, you wouldn't know how it looked either. So if you messed up midway through, you wouldn't know until you were done and would then have to redo everything from scratch. The most influential stop-motion animator of this time in the giant monster genre is without a doubt Willis O'Brien, affectionately called Obi by his friends and colleagues. O'Brien was born March 2nd, 1886, in Oakland, California. At age 11, and again at 13, he left home and worked a multitude of jobs, the most significant of which was a guide to paleontologists in the Crater Lake region. It was here, watching them at work, that he developed his fascination with dinosaurs. He would sculpt in his spare time, which led to him getting a job as a draftsman in an architect's office, and then as a cartoonist for the San Francisco Daily News. He would work various odd jobs, including head architect of the 1915 San Francisco World's Fair. During this time, he would make models, most notably a dinosaur and a caveman, which he then animated with the help of a local newsreel cameraman. A San Francisco exhibitor named Herman Wauber saw this test footage and hired O'Brien to make the dinosaur and the missing link, a prehistoric tragedy, in 1915. The budget was reportedly $5,000. A man you may have heard of named Thomas Edison, or those at his company depending on who's telling the story, saw this film and, impressed by it, hired O'Brien to animate a series of short films for the Edison Company under the banner of Conquest Pictures. These shorts included RFD, 10,000 BC, and Prehistoric Poultry. These are rather humorous stories about cavemen with modern sensibilities and problems, like how shows such as the Flintstones would portray the Stone Age years later. They both released in 1917 and were entirely stop-motion animated. He would work on other Edison productions, including Sam Lloyd's The Puzzling Billboards and Nippy's Nightmare, both in 1917, which were the first stop-motion films to combine live actors with stop-motion models. Unfortunately, Edison's Conquest Pictures would shut down in March of 1918 due to financial and legal trouble. Fortunately for O'Brien, J. Sear Dolly, a prolific director for the Edison Company, had a cousin, Herbert M. Dolly. Dolly, a former armor major and sculptor, wanted to make films about dinosaurs and was actively experimenting with his own models for this purpose. Dolly would take pictures and then make flipbooks, making his models appear to move. Searle recommended Dolly work with O'Brien, so Dolly reached out in early 1918. The two would then collaborate on a film called The Ghost of Slumber Mountain, released in 1918. The film was about a man named Holmes, played by Dolly, telling his kids of a time from his youth where he stumbled across a cabin that once belonged to an old hermit named Mad Dick, played by O'Brien. Holmes meets the ghost of Mad Dick in his cabin and has him use a scope that lets him see into the past. He sees many ancient creatures, including a T-Rex and Triceratops, battling in the distance. He's then chased by the Rex until it is revealed that it was all just in fact a dream. The film originally clocked in at about around 40 minutes, but was cut down to around 18 minutes due to a request before the premiere, as it was thought to be too long. This shortened version is all that exists today and was a box office success, making $100,000 on a $3,000 budget. The duo's working relationship was not as successful, however. O'Brien's name was removed from the credits, and he received very little compensation for this film. Dolly claimed credit for O'Brien's work and produced a sequel called Along the Moonbeam Trail in 1920 and a documentary, Evolution, in 1923. These reportedly used cut special effects footage from O'Brien's work from The Ghost of Slumber Mountain. What I just told you has been O'Brien's version of events and the accepted truth for over 80 years, painting Dolly as the villain and O'Brien as a victim. Recently, new information has come to light telling Dolly's side of the story. In the early 2010s, film historian Stephen Zirkus unearthed Dolly's personal archives, writing about his findings in issue 138 of Cinefix. I don't have the means to get a copy of this difficult-to-find issue, so this is all secondhand information from Nicholas Ciccone from the audio commentary for the most recent release of The Lost World, as well as an essay by Kyle Bird featured in the book Kong Unmade, The Lost Films of Skull Island Revisited. I'll leave a link to both below. Zirkus found letters detailing Dolly's time working with O'Brien. Dolly claimed he was unsatisfied with O'Brien's work and was only able to get good results when he was supervising O'Brien. He reportedly took over animation duties, giving the task of cutting the film down for the release to O'Brien. Dolly would then leave to supervise a disaster response after an explosion at an ammunition plant. When Dolly returned, he found that O'Brien had put himself on the theater program as a producer. Dolly felt the credit he had given O'Brien was too generous already, causing him to remove O'Brien altogether. Dolly also had reason to believe that O'Brien was showing copies of The Ghost of Slumber Mountain to Rodison R. Rodhacker, who would eventually work on The Lost World with O'Brien, without Dolly's permission. This is all apparently for O'Brien to take ownership of the stop-motion animation process. Rodhacker even tried to have The Ghost of Slumber Mountain blocked from distribution. When O'Brien showed the film to producer Catherine Curtis, who was set to produce The Lost World, after seeing that O'Brien's name was not on it, canceled production and contacted Dolly, who then sued Rodhacker. Dolly had patented parts of the stop-motion process in 1920, namely the parts that make up the armature skeleton and skin of the models, causing further difficulties for Rodhacker. The matter was eventually settled out of court. Now there are two major clues that back up Dolly's version of events. It was long thought that Dolly reused deleted scenes from The Ghost of Slumber Mountain for Along the Moonbeam Trail. Zirkus was able to find photographic evidence of Dolly working on Along the Moonbeam Trail, which O'Brien had no part in making. Furthermore, Zirkus found one of the two reels of Along the Moonbeam Trail thought to be lost. The animation of the dinosaurs in it is very similar to The Ghost of Slumber Mountain and distinctly un-O'Brien-like. You see, O'Brien would often give his characters quirks that would give them personality. An example of this is Kong playing with the mouth of the T-Rex he kills in King Kong. Dolly's characters, on the other hand, were more animalistic and lacked these personality quirks. It's hard to say how much work on The Ghost of Slumber Mountain was O'Brien's work and how much was Dolly's, but we can say now that Dolly deserves more credit for his contributions to the genre. He was almost or equally as talented as O'Brien, at least at this point in the two's history. This is not meant to diminish O'Brien's legacy or contributions, rather it is to recognize Dolly's efforts and contributions, as he is not nearly as known as he should be. The lawsuit in the rearview mirror for O'Brien and Rodhacker. They were free to start pre-production on an adaptation of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's The Lost World. The Lost World was produced and distributed by First National Pictures. Harry O'Hoyt would direct, with Marion Fairfax responsible for adapting a screenplay from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's novel. O'Brien would handle the special effects for the film. He would be joined by his frequent collaborators from here on out, Ralph Hamers and Marcel Delgado. Hamers created the glass shot, the act of putting a glass panel either before or behind a shot with background and foreground details painted on them to construct miniature sets. Delgado would be charged with constructing the models used for the film. Skeptical if these effects could even be pulled off, Fairfax would write the script with scenes depicting cannibals and other small creatures that could be more easily brought to life if O'Brien failed to produce results. It is unknown if any of these scenes made it into the final film. The movie had many scenes not in the script, and the script had many scenes not in the movie, making this difficult to ascertain. The fear was not unfounded, with over 50 dinosaurs featured, as well as multiple scenes of actors and stop-motion dinosaurs appearing in the same shot. This was the most ambitious undertaking of the stop-motion technique to date. O'Brien did most of the animating himself, though he did receive help from Delgado and Hammerus and an assistant, Joseph Roop. The dinosaurs sculpted by Delgado were inspired by paintings by Charles R. Knight. Ray Harryhausen would write in his book co-authored by Tony Dalton, titled A Century of Stop-Motion Animation from Méliès to Aardman, about the creation of these armatures. Before Delgado began work on the models, Obi designed more technically advanced ball and socket armatures made of aluminum, which improved on the previous designs, allowing for smoother animation and better rigidity during photography. Delgado made clay models of the main creatures on Obi's drawings to work from, and began to construct the bodies of the armatures. He started by placing rough rubber muscles on various parts of the armature. If a bladder was to be used, this of course would be inserted first, which would stretch and change shape realistically when the joints were moved to different positions. He then stuffed the metal ribcage and the outer area of the armature with cotton, forming the basic shape of the animal, which was then covered with latex rubber. Finally, the models were painted in colors that would reflect best in black and white photography. Although relatively crude by today's standards, the models were state-of-the-art in the early 1920s, and today still have a quality of innocence and charm. A combination of shellac and rubber cement would be used to simulate saliva, and chocolate syrup would depict blood. The process of animating the dinosaurs was massively time-consuming. O'Brien would be able to animate roughly half a minute of footage per workday. That's a 12-hour workday, not the 8 that we'd hear to today. The results are nothing short of a miracle. There's a stampede scene, one of the biggest set pieces of the film. The scene required a 75 by 150-foot miniature set, complete with herds of dinosaurs fleeing a volcanic eruption. The stage needed slots built underneath so that the animators could access the set as needed. During pre-production, Harry Houdini would invite Doyle to speak at the National Society of American Magicians in New York. There, he would show test footage from the film to the group and pass it off as real living, breathing dinosaurs. This was a brilliant marketing move, as it would be featured in the New York Times, and although it didn't fool everyone, the remarks were that they were extraordinarily lifelike. If fakes, they were masterpieces. The Lost World is a story about a group of explorers led by ornery Professor Challenger to a plateau untouched by the passage of time. The explorers would then be terrorized with various types of dinosaurs and a missing link ape man, played by wrestler Bill Montana. The explorers would escape with a brontosaurus that they brought back to civilization. The brontosaurus subsequently breaks loose and wreaks havoc on the city of London before swimming away in the River Thames. The film, a classic it has every right being, doesn't absolve it of some controversy. It does feature a horrifyingly racist depiction of a character named Zambo, played by Jules Cowles in blackface. The women as well suffer in the film, being fairly negative stereotypes. This is all very disappointing considering Doyle was a big advocate for civil rights. The film would release on February 1925 to amazing success both critically and financially, and was one of the top grossing films of that year. Unfortunately, it is also a partially lost film. What we have today is an incomplete, pieced-together version from various sources, mostly from private collectors from around the world. You see, in the 1930s, there was going to be a sound remake of The Lost World. Due to this, they decided to destroy all the copies of the originals, seeing it as something that was not needed. This is an unfortunate fate for such an influential film that has many firsts to its name. The first feature-length dinosaur film, the first feature-length film to have both live-action actors and stop-motion puppets in the same shot, and interestingly enough, the first film to be shown as an in-flight movie. Look it up. O'Brien would work on several films over the rest of the decade, none of them ever being picked up by the studios. The most notable being Creation, another dinosaur film about an island that rises from the ocean depths that a yacht full of civilians lands on to escape the sinking of their ship. The film was to be directed by Harry Hoyt, and O'Brien and Delgado would provide the special effects. The film was massively expensive to produce, and although RKO Pictures did pick it up and spent a reported $100,000 on the pre-production, they ultimately filmed only a few reels of test footage before the project was canceled in favor of another movie, one that would reuse most of the models from Creation and cement O'Brien as one of the greatest stop-motion animators of all time, a film titled King Kong. Thank you guys for watching. If you've made it this far, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. I'll be doing more of these as I have time throughout the year and hopefully into the future. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one.